Last year, the first spot Bitcoin ETFs were launched, serving as rocket fuel for Bitcoin's price. Well, right now, a wave of altcoin ETF applications are in the pipeline. And this could potentially send altcoin prices higher if wider market conditions are favorable. And that's why today we're going to take a look at all these pending altcoin ETF applications, tell you which ones are the most likely to be approved, when this could happen, and what this could mean for your altcoin bags.
What's your name?
My name is Nick. Stay tuned. Before we go any further, you need to know that I am not a financial advisor and nothing in this video should be considered financial or investment advice. This video is for educational purposes only, meant to help you on your crypto quest. With that disclaimer out the way, let's dig in. If you cast your mind back to November 2024, you might just recall the small matter of the US presidential election taking place. I know, time really does fly, doesn't it? Anyways, as you'll know, Trump emerged victorious and he was able to get his old job back. Good for him. But this was even better news for crypto investors. And that's because during his campaign, Trump presented himself as pro-Bitcoin and as an advocate for the crypto industry more broadly. Naturally then, his election victory had everyone excited about the prospects of crypto-friendly regulations under his administration. And, most importantly, the prospects of a much more crypto-friendly SEC. We don't need to remind you that former SEC chair Gary Gensler was one of the most hated people in crypto. Under Gensler's rule, the SEC provided very little to no regulatory clarity, instead opting for a regulation by enforcement approach, basically slapping the unregistered securities label on practically everything and firing lawsuits out like they were confetti. Thankfully, Trump's election victory means Gary Gensler stepped down on the 20th of January, the same day Trump was inaugurated. Safe to say, he won't be missed. And if the thought of Gary leaving office still brings you joy, show it by smashing that like button and subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification bell as well. Now, in Gary's place is acting chairman Mark Ueda, who still serves as SEC chair until the position is permanently filled. Mark is pro-crypto and is a known critic of the regulation by enforcement approach that Gary and his director of enforcement, Goober Graywell, were so fond of. Mark instead wants to provide clear and fair regulations and even established the SEC's first crypto task force. And this task force was led by Hester Peirce and will prioritize the SEC's move away from regulation by enforcement and towards transparent regulations that foster innovation. Now, Trump's permanent nominee for SEC chair is Paul Atkins. Now, Paul is likewise pro-crypto and is against regulations that caused unnecessary obstructions, instead advocating for free market principles and innovation. Paul previously served as SEC commissioner between 2002 and 2008, where he focused on enhancing compliance. But Paul isn't the only pro-crypto candidate that Donald Trump has nominated into key positions, and you can of course learn more about all of the others by watching this video over here. In any case, what's crazy is how much the SEC has shifted its stance since Gary's departure. Besides dismissing lawsuits against exchanges, it has approved the first ever yield-bearing stablecoin security, declared that meme coins aren't securities, and has even begun engaging with crypto firms to discuss regulations. It's also revoked that controversial SAB 121 rule, which basically prevented banks from holding crypto. And best of all, the SEC has already acknowledged spot ETF applications for a whole bunch of altcoins, signaling that many more could soon be approved. What this means is that these altcoins could see some serious inflows. And if you're looking to trade these cryptos, you have to check out the Coin Bureau deals page. You'll find up to $100,000 in sign-up bonuses for some of the best exchanges and up to 75% cashback on your deposits. You see, this deal is exclusively for the viewers of the Coin Bureau and won't be around forever. So take advantage of them with the link in the description below while you still can. Now, with that out of the way, let's take a look at those pending altcoin ETF applications. Okay, the first altcoin to potentially get a spot ETF in 2025 is XRP. In our previous update, XRP had 4 spot ETF applications, those being from Bitwise, 21 Shares, Canary Capital, and Wisdom Tree. On the 24th of January, CoinShares, formerly known as Valkyrie, filed for an XRP ETF. And soon after, on the 31st of January, New York Stock Exchange subsidiary Arca lodged a filing to convert Grayscale's XRP Trust into a spot ETF. The CBOE BZX exchange also filed XRP ETFs on behalf of Bitwise, 21 Shares, Canary Capital, and Wisdom Tree. These filings informed the SEC of a few changes in the hopes that the regulator would authorize the first spot XRP ETFs in the US. And most recently, Volatility Shares has also filed for a spot XRP ETF on the 8th of March. This brings the total to 7 issuers looking to get a spot XRP ETF approved. To refresh your memory, that's Bitwise, 21 Shares, Canary Capital, Wisdom Tree, CoinShares, Grayscale, and Volatility Shares. Many people believe XRP could in fact be the first altcoin to get an ETF, since it's one of the only cryptos with regulatory clarity in the US. And that's because Ripple, which of course issues XRP, famously beat the SEC in court in July 2023. However, Bloomberg ETF analysts have noted that XRP may face hurdles getting a spot ETF, and this is precisely because the SEC had explicitly gone after Ripple and its executives over XRP. And while the case was resolved in Ripple's favor, the SEC appealed the ruling. Oddly enough, this appeal has not been revoked yet, at least at the time of shooting this video. It should come as no surprise then that the likelihood that XRP will be the first altcoin ETF issued in the US seems to be slipping. As we record this, Polymarket has a 2025 approval chance at 75%, which is lower than Solana's. So far, the SEC has acknowledged XRP filings from Grayscale and 21 Shares. When this happens, it usually means that the ball will start rolling in the following days. And this means that the final deadline that we could expect to see spot XRP ETFs hit the market will be somewhere in the middle of October 2025. Now, the second altcoin that could get a spot ETF in 2025 is Solana. And if you watched our previous altcoin ETF update, you'll know that there were a total of 5 spot Solana ETF applications submitted to the SEC for approval. And these were filed by asset managers like VanEck, 21 Shares, Canary Capital, Bitwise, and Grayscale. You might also recall that the SEC was planning to reject 2 of these applications. For context, this was in December 2024, so we're sure it's just a coincidence that Gary Gensler's SEC made this decision between Trump's election victory and him actually taking office, right? Anyways, as it turned out, the SEC would fail to acknowledge the 4 spot Solana ETFs from VanEck, 21 Shares, Canary, and Bitwise before their deadline of the 21st of January. According to Bloomberg ETF analyst James Seifert, this means they were effectively denied outright by the SEC. Luckily, though, the CBOE BZX would refile on behalf of all 4 of these issuers just a few days later on the 28th of January. While this may have kind of restarted the process, this is arguably a good thing since Gary has now left, meaning the application will be reviewed by a much more crypto-friendly SEC. On top of this, the SEC has recently acknowledged Grayscale's spot ETF application, which again aims to convert its Solana trust into an ETF, the same way Grayscale created its spot Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs. And this means that the final deadline for the SEC to make a decision falls roughly around the 11th of October of this year. For those of you who are wondering, the SEC has 45 days to make a decision, which can include extending to a maximum of 240 days from the date of the submission. Historically, the SEC has used almost all 240 days for each crypto ETF filing. And this is why Bloomberg ETF analyst Eric Balkunas highlighted that this acknowledgement was notable, since the SEC would have probably ignored the application under its previous administration. And this suggests that the likelihood of ETF approvals is now significantly higher, underscoring the SEC's increasingly favorable stance towards crypto. In fact, at the time of shooting, according to Polymarket, these ETFs have an 86% chance of approval in 2025. James has suggested, though, that the approval could be delayed until 2026 due to all the lawsuits against crypto companies that allege Sol is an unregistered security. But it looks like these lawsuits are quickly being paused or thrown out by the SEC. Anyway, more recently, another asset manager has thrown its hat into the ring, and that's Franklin Templeton, which filed for a spot Solana ETF on the 21st of February. So, to refresh your memory, the list of applicants now include Van Eck, 21 shares, Canary Capital, Bitwise, Grayscale, and now Franklin Templeton. The final deadline for most of these will be sometime in mid-October. So, assuming that there's not another change of heart, the SEC will approve at least 6 spot Solana ETFs by the end of the year, assuming it hasn't done so already. Alright, another altcoin that could soon get a spot ETF is an OG crypto, and that's Litecoin. In our last altcoin ETF update, there was just one submission for a Litecoin ETF, which came from Canary Capital, way back in October last year. And this was when they had filed their S1 form, with the form 19B4 following a few months later on the 15th of January. Anyhow, since Canary filed for the spot Litecoin ETF, several others have followed suit. CoinShares filed for a Litecoin ETF on the 24th of January, and Grayscale filed to convert its Litecoin trust into an ETF on the 6th of February. And what's strange is that only 3 ETF issuers have filed for a Litecoin ETF, despite it arguably having the best chance of approval. James Seifert and Eric Balkunas, those aforementioned Bloomberg ETF analysts, reckon there's a 90% chance that Litecoin will get an ETF in 2025. That said, though, Seifert also says he doesn't believe that a Litecoin ETF would generate that much demand, and this sentiment could explain why Polymarket has Litecoin's chance of approval at just 69%. We happen to think that James and Eric are indeed right, and that Litecoin could be the next altcoin to get a spot ETF. There are a few reasons for this. First is the fact that it's one of the few cryptos with a pending ETF application that the SEC hasn't tried to label as a security at any point. Litecoin is also a fork of Bitcoin, and it markets itself as a digital silver, kind of like Bitcoin is the digital gold. And this makes it closer to a commodity and also makes it much easier to understand for both investors and, most importantly, regulators. In any case, the final deadline for Litecoin ETFs falls somewhere around the 3rd of October. But honestly, we'd be surprised it takes anywhere near that long for the approval. Okay, folks, the next altcoin with a potential spot ETF lined up might just surprise you, and that's Dogecoin. Yep, even crypto's oldest canine coin is getting its paws in on the action. If we'd have told you this a few months ago, you would have said we were barking mad, and we'd have been slinking off with our tails between our legs. All right, sorry, I'll stop with the dog puns. As it turns out, quite a few applications have been filed for spot Dogecoin ETFs, and the reason for this is obvious. Put simply, ETF issuers are testing the boundaries. After all, if a meme coin can get an ETF approved by the SEC, it will prove that the SEC has indeed changed its tune. I mean, can you imagine this happening under Gary Gensler's reign? I'd say we would rather have had a better chance of seeing Elvis running for president. In fact, to really test how pro-crypto the SEC is becoming, 2 asset managers, namely Osprey Funds and Rex Shares, have collaboratively filed for a whole bunch of meme coin ETFs. And these include Dogecoin and Bonk, as well as the official Trump and Melania shitcoins. Meme coins. Now, this might sound crazy, but it's not as bananas as you think. At the end of February this year, the SEC declared that meme coins are not securities. We can only imagine Gary Gensler's face when he heard about that one. Anyway, what this means is that it's now surprisingly unlikely that these ETF applications will get rejected. What a time to be in crypto. Hey folks? Other asset managers filing for Dogecoin ETF include Bitwise and Grayscale, both of which applied at the end of January. We should also point out that Tutel Capital has really been testing the boundaries by filing for a leveraged ETF, including for meme coins we just mentioned. It'll be intriguing to see how that one plays out, to say the least. On the 13th of February, the SEC acknowledged Grayscale's Dogecoin ETF filing, which means the clock, it's now ticking. And this means that a rough estimate for the final deadline is somewhere around the 11th of October. Okay, last pun, I swear. We should caveat, though, and say that according to Bloomberg intelligence info shared by James Seyffert, the final deadline for a spot Dogecoin ETF is actually the 6th of April rather than mid-September. It's not entirely clear why there's such a difference in the dates there, but hey, those guys, they're the ETF experts and we have no right to question them. Okay, folks, at this stage, we should point out that these asset managers have also been filing for a range of other altcoin ETFs. However, in most cases, this involves just one asset manager, suggesting that there's not that much wider interest. That said, though, new altcoin ETF applications seem to be crawling out of the woodwork on a daily basis, so we thought it would be wise to keep you up to date as much as possible, because, who knows? It may not be long before these altcoins end up with a whole bunch of ETF approvals. So, with that in mind, let's get into it. First up is Cardano, for which Grayscale filed an ETF application on the 10th of February. The SEC then acknowledged this 2 weeks later on the 24th, and this means that the final deadline for a spot Cardano ETF will fall somewhere around the 22nd of October. Another one is Polkadot, surprisingly, which has seen 2 ETF applications, one from 21 shares on the 31st of January and another from Grayscale on the 24th of February. At the time of shooting, the SEC has yet to acknowledge either of them. Assuming they will, though, this puts the final deadline somewhere in late September or early October. There's also Aptos, which has had one recent ETF filing from Bitwise on the 5th of March, giving it a rough timeline somewhere in early November. And then there's Hedera, which has had 2 ETF filings, one from Canary on the 24th of February and another from Grayscale on the 3rd of March. Again, this means a deadline somewhere in the middle of October. It's not just individual altcoins that have had ETF filings either. There's also been a number of ETF filings that incorporate multiple cryptos into one product. For instance, in Q4 of last year, Hashdex, Franklin Templeton, and Bitwise filed for dual ETFs that would track the price of Bitcoin and ETH. These were later approved by the SEC, marking the first ETFs for multiple cryptos. The only problem now is that these dual ETFs have seen very limited demand so far. Not a great start. But dual ETFs are just the tip of the iceberg. On November 27th, Bitwise filed for its top 10 crypto index, which provides exposure to BTC, ETH, SOL, XRP, ADA, AVAX, BCH, Link, Uni, and DOT. However, this was put on pause on the 14th of January when the SEC postponed the decision. And on the 17th of January, CoinShares filed an application for its digital assets ETF, which consists of BTC, ETH, ADA, AVAX, DOT, Link, SOL, XLM, and XRP. At the time of shooting, the SEC has yet to acknowledge this filing. Now, there could be a whole bunch of other altcoin ETF applications submitted by the time you actually watch this video. It's clear that this trend isn't likely to slow down until the SEC puts the brakes on, which begs the obvious question, what does this mean for the crypto market? Well, in case it wasn't obvious, the approval of each spot ETF would likely be incredibly bullish for the altcoin in question. And that's because it would open the floodgates to new waves of capital entering the market from traditional and institutional investors who may prefer to use ETFs as a safer way to invest in these riskier assets. Not only is this more convenient for most investors, but for every altcoin ETF approval, the crypto industry gains an extra layer of legitimacy. And this could drive up adoption of crypto, with non-crypto native investors everywhere having exposure to crypto in their portfolios. And this would be incredibly bullish, especially for any altcoins that were previously branded as securities by the SEC. And that's because it would remove any regulatory uncertainty around these assets, allowing investors to feel much more comfortable to ape in. As a result, many investors would likely begin speculating on which altcoin ETF could be next. As prices begin to rise as a result of this speculation, retail investors will jump on board that rocket ship, pushing prices up even higher. And if there's lots of demand for the altcoin ETFs listed at that time, you can bet that asset managers will be rushing to file ETF applications for every major altcoin in existence. However, lots of demand is crucial. If it doesn't materialize, rather like what happened when the spot Ethereum ETFs launched last year, then sentiment could turn sour very quickly, and the altcoins in question could tank in price as a result. And this is what makes these altcoin ETFs a somewhat risky proposition. They could open the floodgates to a wave of capital, or they could reveal that there wasn't really that much demand for altcoins in any form from the wider investing public. And there's a definitive sense that this could be an all or nothing scenario. Let's hope it's the former. In sum then, spot altcoin ETFs could be the spark needed to get altcoins moving. But obviously, it looks like this is going to take a few months, and there will need to be a real demand for prices to rise. In the meantime, we'll be trying to get over the fact that it could paradoxically be the SEC that kickstarts it all. What a lot can happen in crypto in just a few months. Hey folks? Okay guys, if you enjoyed that video, then you'll love this one right over here. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, you can do that right over here. That's me for now. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.